Greetings and salutations, friends, and welcome back to yet more Warhammer 40k lore, and today we are going to start a new mini-series, or, well, mini. It's probably going to be rather massive, but it is mini in that it has a somewhat limited scope. The name of this series is Imperial Armour, where we're going to be looking at all of the various vehicles in 40k. Not just Imperial, mind you, but I do love the Imperial Armour series. It is one of the best sourcebook series that has ever been released in Warhammer 40k, so I think it's a fitting name. Additionally, to celebrate the occasion of launching a new series, I've also got some brand new merchandise to push. I now sell hoodies and polos. If you're interested in having a look at these rather cool looking apparels, there will be a link in the description below. I will also have a small sample on screen. And now, without further ado, let's get into episode 1 of Imperial Armour. The question of which vehicle to cover first was a slightly difficult one, because there really is two vehicles that deserves the number 1 slot. But at the end of the day, I have to give it to the Imperial Guard Chimera, because no single vehicle is produced in as vast numbers and in as many different variations as the Chimera, beating out, albeit slightly, the Leman Russ main battle tank. So let us start then with the basics. What exactly is a Chimera? Is it an IFV, an infantry fighting vehicle? Is it an APC, an armoured personnel carrier? Or is it an AFV, armoured fighting vehicle? Well, the simple truth is, the Chimera is all of those things and more. As mentioned, the thing has a bajillion different variations, and not only does it have different variations on its IFV, APC, etc. roles, its base chassis is also used for a ton of different types of vehicles. The Chimera chassis is used for mobile artillery, for large-scale siege mortars, for flak batteries, for anti-aircraft artillery, for mobile missile launchers, for recovery trucks, for quite literally everything your little mind could possibly imagine. There is a Chimera that fits the description. But by far the most common pattern is the Mars pattern Chimera. This is the one that comes standard out of the box if you happen to purchase one of these adorable little thingies. It comes with a turret-mounted multi-laser, a hull-mounted heavy bolter, and twin triple lasgun arrays. The latter, by the way, is exactly what it sounds like. It is literally 3 lasguns on the right and 3 lasguns on the left-hand side of the tank, mounted on the chassis itself that is operatable by the passengers of the Chimera, and they function precisely like the good old-fashioned standard-issue Imperial flashlight has always done. In other words, extraordinarily poorly, but reliably. Some patterns, like for example the flamethrower patterns, might replace these with a large storage vat which holds the promethium. Other variants, like the medical variant or the command variants, might replace them with various types of equipment. Extra space for medical equipment, or additional room for command, control, and communications devices. The other weapon systems are equally adaptable. For example, a common replacement for the multi-laser might be a heavy flamer, a heavy bolter, or even an autocannon. Meanwhile, the heavy bolter in the hull could be switched out for yet another heavy flamer, in case you really needed to deal with some nasty bunker lines. You could maybe throw on a hunter-killer missile on the Chimera as well, an external missile launcher, to add just a little bit of armor-cracking potential to an armoured fist formation. But let us now have a look at a very specific and very specialised pattern of the Chimera armoured fighting vehicle. In this case, an IFV variant known as the Griffon IV pattern. This variant comes with a twin-linked, turret-mounted heavy bolter with 360 degrees of rotation, 8 degrees of gun depression, and 25 degrees of gun elevation, along with either a hull-mounted heavy bolter or a heavy flamer. The turret-mounted twin heavy bolter comes with 1,000 rounds of ammunition, 500 per gun as standard. In this case, it uses the good old-fashioned heavy bolter round as its main form of ammunition. This is a 25mm high-explosive grenade, meaning that the weapon itself is a twin-linked, 25mm fully automatic grenade launcher. As for the secondary hull-mounted weapon, in the case of a heavy bolter, it carries an additional 400 rounds of ammunition of the same type as the turret-mounted weapon, or in the case of a hull-mounted heavy flamer, it carries enough promethium for 10 5-second bursts. The Griffon IV pattern also, of course, comes with the standard lasgun arrays with 3 to the right and 3 to the left. These lasguns draw their power directly from the vehicle's main power plant, which in all due essentiality means that they have a practically infinite supply of ammunition. Of course, the vehicle is eventually going to run out of fuel, and as it runs out of fuel and the power plant goes dead, the lasguns will also eventually peter out, but for any normal battlefield operation, they're essentially limitless. And speaking of power plant, the Griffon IV comes with a Volcano 16 twin-coupled multi-burn engine. This bad boy running off promethium is capable of belting out almost 1,800 horsepower, thusly propelling the 38 tons of the Chimera at 70 km per hour on a paved surface or 55 km per hour off-road. It would translate into roughly 40 horsepowers per ton, which is pretty damn amazing, but you should also bear in mind that it isn't pure engine power. A fair bit of that also goes to operating the lasguns mounted on the rear. And the Chimera really does need that monstrous engine, because it is a burly little bastard. At 6.9 meters long, 5.7 meters wide, and 3.7 meters tall, it is a rotund little rascal. Fortuitously for the people riding in it, it makes up for what it lacks in stealth with sheer weight of armored protection. The turret has 150mm of armor, the slanted superstructure has another 150mm, and the front hull has a further 100mm of armor. And this is of course before any additional armor packages and or upgrades are applied to the vehicle. The Chimera has access to a wide array of upgrade packages, including explosive reactive armor, ablative spaced armor, and of course simply just additional bolted-on metal plating. After all, if it works for the orcs, surely it'll work just as well for the Imperium of Man. And now that we know a little bit more about the specifics of a Chimera, let's talk about what they're actually used for, and this is going to have to be in somewhat general terms because, of course, the Chimera can essentially do anything, and that is partially the point. An armoured fist formation, a mechanized unit of Imperial Guards, would probably have several different variants on Chimera, so we're talking just different variants on the Chimera itself, rather than entirely different vehicles that are merely based upon the Chimera's hull. The most numerous variant then would in all due likelihood be the Mars pattern, with its multi-laser and hull-mounted heavy bolter. This is your standard infantry carrying machine. It carries a full squad of 10 Imperial Guardsmen in the back, and its job is simply to trundle up to the enemy position, eating whatever firepower they can throw at it, hopefully without exploding, whilst laying down a withering barrage of covering fire. This particular variant would be best suited to dealing with enemy infantry, as the multi-laser's got a fair bit of a punch even against relatively tough infantry targets, but it really lacks the armor-penetrating capabilities of the heavy bolter. And of course, we are speaking in relative terms here. The heavy bolter offers a fair bit more flexibility in engaging lightly armored vehicles, but it is of course going to do little more than create a vast quantity of pretty-looking sparks if fired against the front armor of an actual tank. This again is the beauty of the standard Chimera pattern, since it comes with a multi-laser for dealing with tough infantry and a hull-mounted heavy bolter for shredding those annoying light vehicles. Once the Chimera presumably has made its way safely to the enemy lines and disgorged its unit of infantry, it then takes up the role of an IFV, providing fire support to its infantry detachment and adding a little bit of flexibility to the infantry force. Even just the standard Mars pattern Chimera has a multi-laser for dealing with enemy heavy infantry, a heavy bolter for dealing with light armor, and potentially a single hunter-killer missile. This is a single-shot, guided rocket weapon mounted on the external hull of the Chimera, useful for knocking out, or at the very least scaring the absolute shit out of enemy armored vehicles. Now, of course, a single missile is unlikely to destroy an enemy tank, but considering there's likely to be half a dozen Chimeras for every enemy tank, well, half a dozen missiles, that will certainly get the job done one way or the other. In a perfect world, an Imperial Guard Armoured Fist Regiment would of course have access to several different types of chimeras, so that the larger formation could fulfill a wider array of battlefield tasks, and send specialized chimeras to deal with specialized objectives. Let's take a generalized battle plan as an example. First and foremost, the primary purpose of an armored fist fighting company is of course to bring the infantry into contact with the enemy in as safe a manner as humanly possible. That of course means that you want the most flexible and heavily armoured chimeras up front, delivering the infantry. That, in all due likelihood, would be the Mars patterns then, since their combination of multi-laser and heavy bolter gives them a decent answer to pretty much anything they will run into. And if you throw in a few hunter-killer missiles, either in the first line or in the fire support line of chimeras, you've also got, if not a perfect answer, at the very least some answer to enemy heavy armour. This first rush line of chimeras would race towards the enemy fortifications as fast as their overpowered engines could possibly carrying them. In some instances, these hugely powerful engines might even be overcharged to an even greater degree. This of course introduces a rather considerable degree of, shall we say, instability to the vehicle in question, but it does make it a hell of a lot faster. An alternative approach to simply racing towards the enemy lines might be to upgrade the chimeras with some form of additional armor. This could, for example, take the place, as previously mentioned, in the form of additional spaced ablative armor, or perhaps explosive reactive armor, or also, again of course, just simply additional slabs of metal bolted onto the chimera. These additional defensive precautions might just be the difference between a chimera ending up as a burning wreck with its unfortunate passengers char-broiled inside, and a happy little chimera sitting hull down in some trench somewhere after disgorging its infantry payload and now just taking its leisurely time blasting apart some enemy infantry. Additional upgrades that would be very useful for a chimera of this particular task would, for example, be the Dozer Blade upgrade, allowing the chimera to clean out various impediments that might otherwise trouble its infantry. Another very worthwhile upgrade might be the smoke launchers, allowing the chimera to close upon the enemy's defensive positions whilst not allowing the enemy to get a clear line of sight to it. Having lots of armor is always good, but not getting hit in the first place is always better. The first line of chimeras should also be a mix of heavy bolter hull mounts and heavy flamers. This will allow the chimeras to deal with any opposition they might run into, as a heavy flamer is always a very good option indeed when dealing with a nice big fat immobile bunker. And whilst the chimera's heavy weapons are keeping the enemy's heads down, their complement of infantry should be disgorged directly into the enemy's defensive positions. Armoured fist assault squads often utilise a variety of close-quarters support weapons, a la flamers and plasma guns. This allows them to clear out enemy fortifications, blast them open, and also deal with any enemy heavy infantry that they might be so unfortunate as to run into. Whilst all of this is happening, there should also be a second line of chimeras. They should start the battle a fair distance behind the first wave. They should then quickly move up behind the first wave of chimeras and lay down suppressive fire on the enemy's fortifications, because the best thing of all, even better than having the armor to stop a shot, even better than not being hit, is to make sure that the enemy can't shoot you in the first place, by making damn sure that they are far too busy keeping their heads down to fire their weapons. The ideal complement for this task would probably be an array of autocannons and heavy bolters. The Griffon IV pattern would be particularly worthwhile here, as it could act both as a frontline and a second-line support unit. You can imagine how unlikely enemy infantry is to want to man their heavy weapons if they're currently under fire from 3 25mm grenade launchers. As the first line eventually reaches the enemy and starts disgorging their infantry, this second line will begin point support. The infantry will move from strong point to strong point, whilst the chimeras will focus all of their fire on single fortifications at a time, making sure that they are overrun and cleared out before moving on to the next one. This combination of concentrated firepower and wider area of effect suppression fire will allow the Armored Fist formation to destroy an enemy fortification piecemeal, by concentrating pulverizing amounts of firepower on a single target, while the rest of the formation maintains a solid barrage of covering fire on the remainder of the enemies. This is of course an extraordinarily ammunition-hungry tactic, but fortunately there is of course a logistical version of the Chimera as well. In fact, there are several. One is especially designed to aid in the loading and firing of heavy artillery weapons. It's even got an adorable little crane on the back and everything. The more usual version is simply a Chimera with the turrets stripped off to give it a slightly smaller profile. The main job of this version is to carry as much ammunition as possible up to the front line and give it out to the various other Chimeras, and then get the hell out of Dodge before being blown to pieces itself. Such a tactic, of course, also requires a great deal of coordination, as set formations of Chimeras need to keep up a constant suppressing fire, whilst other formations are guided towards singular targets and making sure that those targets are cleaned out before moving on to the next one. Luckily, there is of course also a command and control version of the Chimera, equipped with vast quantities of powerful Vox arrays and other surveillance equipment, allowing the Armored Fist commanders to keep in contact with their men and guide each individual Chimera towards its chosen target. Once the first line of enemy defenses has finally been dealt with, the second line of Chimeras will move up and rejoin the first line, reorganizing and reinforcing any casualties sustained during the first attack. At this point, they will either push their attack against the second line of enemy defenses, or if this was the one and only line of defense, which at 40k is rather unlikely, they will begin to try to exploit their breakthrough by pushing deeper into the enemy's territory. And then, last but not least, the job falls to the support Chimeras. Various construction and bulldozing variants might be moved up to bulldoze over the enemy's fortifications or begin digging their own fortifications, in case the Armored Fist Regiment is unsuccessful in continuing their attack and might have to fall back to hold the line that they just captured. Additionally, the logistical Chimeras will move up, resupply, and rearm anyone in need of doing so, and of course, finally, medical Chimeras with accompanying medical personnel will move up to gather up any casualties. This is particularly important in cases where they are fighting enemies with multiple lines of defenses, since said enemies will also, in all due likelihood, have tons and tons and tons of artillery. As you can probably imagine, if you've just lost a part of your defensive line and you're worried that Armored Fist formations will start flowing through it, you might want to smack the place as hard as humanly possible with every single gun you can get your heretical little hands on. This means that gathering up casualties can be a rather interesting experience that is much better done in the safety of an armoured personnel carrier than wandering around in the open with a couple of stretcher bearers. And speaking of casualties, whilst the Chimera is relatively well armoured, the 41st millennium is overflowing with anti-tank weapons that laugh at 150mm of conventional armour plating, and will chew through it like butter. But of course, just because the Chimera has a massive gaping hole in it, and just because the original crew needs to be hosed out with a pressurized water hose, doesn't mean that the vehicle itself is entirely inoperable. And so, alongside with gathering up the more fleshy casualties, there are also Chimeras specifically designed to salvage wrecked vehicles. This is yet another strength of the Chimera. It being a standard template construct, it is built specifically to be robust, easy to produce, and easy to repair. So if a Chimera can be salvaged, in all due likelihood it'll be back on the battlefield within a matter of hours at the least, and a matter of days at the most. The Chimera really is one of the true workhorses of the Imperial Guard, providing flexibility, durability, and reliability to the uncounted billions of men and women that serve in the Emperor's Imperial Guard. I hope you've enjoyed this first episode of Imperial Armour. I imagine this series is going to vary greatly in length. I imagine some of the less lore-heavy vehicles, the simpler ones, are going to have fairly short episodes. We're probably talking 5 to 10 minutes maybe, while some of the more complicated ones might be around the 20-minute marks, and then you've got stuff like the Lehman Russ, which I'm probably going to divide up into various types, because frankly, if I were to list all of them, that'd probably be a couple hours. So, until next time, I have been Arch, thank you all very much for watching, and I hope to see you all again soon. Have a good day.